Good evening and welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us for this evening's webinar, Praying for Rain, Corpus Christi's Water Crisis and the Implications for Municipal Water Planning. My name is Rose Jones and I serve as the Vice President and Environmental Health Committee Co-Chair of Texas Physicians for Social Responsibility. Before we begin, if everyone could just take a minute and write down their name and where they're calling from in the chat, that would be great. And then I'm just going to share a little bit about the organization for those of you who may be joining us for the first time. Texas PSR is a statewide organization of health professionals, researchers, advocates, and concerned community members working to protect human life from serious threats to health and survival. We do that through public education, advocacy, analysis, and expert testimony on issues where health and public policy intersect, including climate change, environmental health, toxic exposures, food systems, and nuclear weapons. Tonight's webinar is very much part of that mission. Water insecurity is rapidly becoming one of the most important public health issues facing Texas communities. When water systems are strained or fail, the consequences reach far beyond infrastructure. They affect patient care, sanitation, emergency response, household safety, and the everyday conditions people need to stay healthy. Now it's my great pleasure to introduce Dr. Robert Mace. Dr. Mace is the Executive Director and Chief Water Policy Officer at Meadows Center for Water and Environment, and a professor of practice in geography and environmental studies at Texas State University. He has more than 30 years of experience in water resources, water policy, and planning in Texas, including 18 years at the Texas Water Development Board, where he served as Deputy Executive Administrator for Water Science and Conservation. His work has focused on groundwater and surface water resources, conservation, drought, flood mitigation, and innovative water strategies, including desalination, reuse, aquifer storage and recovery, and rainwater harvesting. He is also the author of a 2022 book on groundwater sustainability and is currently working on a book about water resources and climate change. I had the pleasure of joining Dr. Mace on his podcast, where he invited me to speak about extreme heat in Texas a few years ago. I appreciated then, as I do tonight, his ability to connect environmental conditions to the real-world decisions facing Texas communities. Tonight, Dr. Mace will help us understand the Corpus Christi water crisis and what it signals for municipal water planning, public health, and climate resilience across the state. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Robert Mace.
Thank you so much, Rose, and thank y'all for having me. This is the first time I've given a presentation on this particular issue with Corpus Christi. It is, of course, a developing situation with things happening every week as we go forward. And then also, I'm not going to claim I know everything that's going on down there, but I'm familiar with the planning data. And then, as was mentioned, I'm doing a lot of research, thinking, going into the book about climate change and water resources. And some of that comes to bear with Corpus Christi. Let me go ahead and share my screen real quick. I'll just preface that Corpus Christi, particularly for folks that are from Corpus Christi or currently kind of living the Corpus Christi issue, it's a very controversial topic. And so just want to acknowledge that there's lots of finger pointing, lots of discussion over what should have, could have been done. The way I'm approaching this is I'm deeply fascinated by what's happened in Corpus, in part because this is some of the research I'm working on in terms of what are the risks of our cities, not only in Texas, but across the country and globally, the risks from climate change or seeing droughts worsen the drought of record, and then how communities respond to these situations. And so I'm hoping there's a lot we can learn through the Corpus Christi situation. Um, and there is a lot of work being done by the Corpus Christi Water, to ensure that they have enough water. But there's still probably going to be a component of praying for rain here. And so I want to talk about, why is that, as well as some of the difficulties I think Corpus has had, in trying to um, activate the strategies that would allow them to avoid this issue. Um, and I want to be clear that there's a lot all of us can learn from Corpus, as well as looking at other cities that have responded well. If you're not familiar with the Meadow Center, this is my 10-second advertisement, but we're a research institute at Texas State University. We operate the glass bottom boats, and so that's what you're seeing here in Spring Lake, the headwaters of the San Marcos River. And we through gifts, grants, and graces, we do research and education on water. You could say our mission is helping people understand water so they can make informed decisions. And we're also stewards of the headwaters of the San Marcos River. Um, so just a little bit about Corpus Christi, if you're not familiar. The bay was quote unquote discovered in 1519. This is by um, early European explorers. The first settlement occurred in 1750. It failed, but the first successful permanent um, occupation occurred in 1839. There's about 320,000 people in Corpus Christi. Um, the city is a water provider to its own, occupants of the city, but it also acts as a wholesaler. In other words, it's selling water to other folks that then provide water. So Corpus Christi provides water to industry, as well as a number of smaller communities in the area. Hosts the fifth largest port. It's the deepest inshore port on the Gulf, and then perhaps most important of all, it's the original home of Whataburger. And there's a nice picture of Corpus. I'm looking into the downtown. Um, so spatially, Corpus is right here on this bay, and we'll talk a bit about where its water comes from, but the kind of where most of the issues are happening right now is the Nueces River Basin and what's happening in the Nueces River Basin. And so it's in south central Texas, stretches up through, this is Kinney County here, Uvalde County, Real and Edwards County up here. So down in here, and it's not a particularly verdant place. It is, if you ever driven in that part of the state, it is pretty dry, pretty deserty looking. In terms of water supplies for Corpus Christi, and we're talking the city itself, at least what it reports where its water comes from. There is, of course, the river, the Nueces River here. It did dash, 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 and that actually should be pointing up that way, just because I'm not carrying the river all the way up. You can see my expert drawing skills here. But Corpus Christi Lake is on the Nueces River, about this location, and then Choke Canyon is not on the main stem of the Nueces. It's actually on a tributary that drains a subbasin to the river. So these are two main reservoirs. There's also the Mary Roads pipeline, which, believe it or not, pulls water from the Colorado River. So Corpus, my understanding is sometime in the past, bought a seniorish rice farming surface water right to the Colorado, and then brings that water all the way across, connects in about right here, and then brings it into the city. Also, Lake Texana is a supply. If you follow the Corpus situation real closely and what the city says, they refer to this as their western supplies, and these two over here as their eastern supplies. There's also a little bit of groundwater out there as well. This is Mary Rose Pipeline. You might be wondering about the name. This is a former mayor, and there she is. I can't tell if she's happy or excited or what's going on there. Angry, I don't know, but that is her standing in a section of the pipe that went into that pipeline, 64-inch pipe. These are a couple tables from the current state water plan, and the state every 5 years puts out a water plan. It consists of regional water plans. Corpus Christi is in what's called Region End, or Coastal Bend region, and then that plan is made up of numerous little plans for various entities across the state. And so current supplies means water that Corpus Christi is getting today, and then how much it can use. Just want you to focus on the names first. So here's the Corpus Christi Choke Canyon Reservoir System. Given that both these reservoirs are, in the same river system, um, folks can manage those together in such a way to maximize water production. And so over the last, I don't know, 20, 30 years, we see more and more of folks that manage multiple reservoirs, managing them together. There's the Colorado run-of-river. This is water that's coming from the Mary Rhodes pipeline. When it says run-of-river, what that means is this water is not coming from a reservoir. So the run-of-river water is really based on rainfall and then run off the landscape into streams and ultimately the Colorado River to provide that water supply. And then we have Lake Texana here. One of my planning friends noted that in the water plan, these numbers for Corpus Christi are for Corpus Christi municipal use, and it doesn't include the manufacturing that Corpus provides water to. And so down here is manufacturing for Nueces County. And so the water planning lumps all the manufacturing in the county into one bucket. I think the vast majority of this is in the Corpus Christi area, but there very well may be some outside of the Corpus Christi area, so keep that in mind. So again, Corpus Christi Choke Canyon, Colorado Run-of-River, Lake Texana. We see some Gulf Coast aquifers, so some groundwater source, and then we see direct reuse. So it's basically wastewater that's treated and then used again. So these 2020s, this would be what in planning parlance we call the current decade. And then there's projections of what these supplies are. So these are supplies that exist now and have the infrastructure to produce the water. So this is stuff that we have now. So sort of like your job income. What is the job you have now? Versus maybe some prospective additional job you might take, in order to get more money into your checking account. This is what we have now. You'll see as you go forward in these decades, and the water planning process looks out 50 years, the numbers go up and down. And so you see here, Corpus Christi Choke Canyon, there's a little bit of there's a decrease over time. And then down here, you actually see a little bit of an increase. So there's kind of some moving water from one source to another source going on here. Colorado Run-of-River, you can kind of see that this is going down a little bit. This is coming up a little bit. Lake Texana, here manufacturing, it goes to 0 in 2040. You'll see the numbers pop up. So again, there's some kind of water swapping going on here. And then once it goes up, you kind of see the numbers go down a little bit. And the going down generally is due to sedimentation. A reservoir doesn't last forever because you get sands and gravels and clays coming in that decrease the storage over time. So what's going on with these reservoirs? And this is really the issue. So this is Choke Canyon, one of the western supplies. And this is from Water Data for Texas webpage that the Water Development Board keeps. And since inundation, so around 1985 when the dam was created, you can kind of see how much, what the lake level was or how much was in storage. This is in thousands of acre feet. Acre foot is 326,000 gallons, 1 foot on an acre, which is the odd way we report things, particularly in the western United States. And then this blue line is top of conservation pool, which is the top of the pool of water intended for use. You'll notice that the line goes a little bit above the conservation pool, suggesting that there's a little bit of a flood pool. So generally, a lot of these reservoirs will serve dual purpose. This one looks mostly to be water supply, but it can do a little bit of capturing some additional water for floods. And generally, flood pool water is released as quickly as possible without causing downstream damage. Well, here's where we are today, and actually this is from 428, but I looked at the numbers earlier today to see if those recent rains did anything. They did not. And so we're at historic lows for Choke Canyon, and it's continuing that downward decline. So this is what everybody's worried about right now, is like that's not a good trend. And this is where the praying for rain comes in, because if we get some rain, then maybe we get a bump up, it gets a reprieve, or maybe we get something like this where it completely throws us out of the drought. You'll notice that we're kind of sitting pretty during this period, and then things got pretty low here as well as here, but nothing like what we're seeing today. This is Lake Corpus Christi. A similar story. There's a little wiggly jiggly stuff going on here. And this is reminding me, I meant to go check. This suggests to me that there was actually a smaller reservoir here, and then they greatly increased the dam height. And so since this period, we've had this amount of conservation storage. Looks like there was a little adjustment here to get a little more out. Sometimes that happens to like move water from the flood pool into the conservation pool. Again, we had kind of some scary stuff in 2011, 2015. And then we're at record lows since inundation starting here. So again, both of these reservoirs are at record lows. Lake Texana was actually looking a little scary. It was looking like this up until a few weeks ago when we got some rains that came through that's thankfully kicked this reservoir up. So these guys started activating their drought management plan, which was kind of forcing reductions on its users. And it's come back up, but maybe it's a sign of a larger trend. This reservoir is a little bit further to the east. We tend to get more rainfall to the east. So maybe, that will work in Corpus Christi's favor and get some more water in here. Or maybe maybe it's a momentary reprieve. We don't know. We're still kind of in this drying trend. I was talking to one of my colleagues today. Feel like things are changing. We've escaped La Nina conditions. We're going into El Nino, and it does seem like the weather patterns are behaving differently. Although we're not seeing the benefits to the western supplies for Corpus Christi. All kinds of headlines, and that's why y'all invited me to talk, because everybody, I should say everybody, but most people are familiar now with this. It's become not only a Texas-wide story, but a national story, and to a certain degree, an international story. I was actually interviewed by Australian TV about a month ago about the Corpus Christi situation. Although it was a Corpus Christi gal who was the news announcer, so she had a direct personal connection to the city. But there's been disaster declarations. You feel like a chastised child. The residents referring to has been like more than a year of banning outdoor watering in Corpus Christi. The negative press, that's not good for Corpus Christi and business boosterism and things like that. It's also not good for the state because it gets people concerned about our water supplies. Talk of declaring water emergencies. The you know Corpus is of course has kind of come and gone on seawater desal. Really, right now, the if it doesn't rain, what will hopefully save the day is groundwater pumping as well as some additional reuse. The story really took off when the governor kind of threatened to take over um, Corpus Christi's water situation. And I was like, I don't know if the governor is online or not, but don't take this the wrong way. Um, but I was like, whoa, he either got bad advice or he didn't seek advice on that because it's like you don't take over a serious problem unless you know for a fact you can fix it. Because if things go south, you've just assumed all the blame. Um, but more appropriately, and this is kind of cool too, because before the Corpus happened, I've speculated on what would happen. At some point, I was like, the governor is probably going to get involved. It's probably going to suspend some rules and some laws to prevent, some unnamed big city from running out of water. And so he is doing some things. He's fast tracked some water permits. We'll see. He also on Lake Texana told that manager to not apply the drought restrictions to Corpus if the reservoir levels fell below 50%. So so he is doing some things that help Corpus Christi, but it all has consequences and bigger implications and policy implications. At the same time, it's like we really can't have Corpus Christi run out of water. Um, and then this was just April 30th, so last week, saying that the city announced it's expecting to declare a level 1 water emergency in September, meaning the city's water supply could fall short of demand. They wouldn't be out of water, which is correct, because I've gotten asked that question: when's Corpus Christi running out of water? I'm like, well, they still have their eastern supplies. They're just not going to have enough. And the city is going to force everyone to drastically cut back on water use. And there's a proposed plan for a 25% reduction across the board. There's been a lot of drama and angst over citizens having, not being able to water outdoors and following um, timetables in terms of washing cars or hand watering plants, whereas industry hasn't taken cuts. And so that's created a lot of bad mojo in the region. This is me. Hopefully nobody's super anti AI in this presentation, but this is me using AI to remind me to talk about how industrial use tends to be inelastic. So these plants don't have a dial on them that you turn from like 100% to 75% efficiency to use 25% less water. There many of these plants, they're either on or they're off if they're not getting the full inputs. And and that's if you're watching your lawn and your trees die, that's not little solace there. But these users also don't have a whole lot of elasticity in their ability to use the water. So it's kind of interesting to me, if this drought continues and Corpus runs into some trouble of implementing their emergency supplies, to see what happens with this implementation. Because if Corpus does an across the board 25% reduction, you're going to see a lot of the industry shut down there. And there's part of me that wonders, I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but part of me wonders maybe that's the plan, right? Because I was asked by another reporter about who's going to get shut down, industry or people, and then I'm like, I don't know. I don't know what they're going to do. I said, but I can't imagine that industry would be continued to run at the expense of health and human safety for people. Hopefully it doesn't come to that, but it very well could. September is still a long ways away, although we got a hot Texas summer coming up. So bad thing about El Nino is it does suppress tropical activity. If we had a good mellow tropical system that dumped rain for 2 weeks in the Nueces River Basin, all of our problems would be solved for the time being. But the odds of that, aren't real high. I calculate in any given year, it's about a 2% chance that you'll have a big tropical system dump a bunch of rain in your basin. So Corpus is experiencing what Cape Town kind of introduced, which is day zero. And I look at Cape Town. I've studied Cape Town. Like their reservoirs started drying up, and Cape Town found themselves not enough water, and so they really ratcheted down on people's use of water, emergency supplies. Fortunately, they were able to hobble along long enough before it rained, which ultimately saved their hide. And there's more and more cities across the world that are experiencing this. Pre-war with Iran, Tehran was facing a day zero. A number of cities in southern Australia were facing day zeros with unexpected droughts. Mexico City has been facing some serious issues. Madrid, more and more we're seeing cities that are dealing with more severe droughts and not having enough water. And to my knowledge, nobody has completely run out of water, knock on wood, but it's coming. Wichita Falls, a little closer. City of 100,000 people, 2011-2015 drought. They were 3 months from completely running out of water. And you know what the solution was? Hauling in bottled water. I mean, that was it. I mean, that city was going to have to evacuate. So it's troubling. But one thing I want to note is, as bad as things are in Corpus Christi, and there's been fights over doing this and doing that. I want to say that for the most part, we are all Corpus Christi, because the situation Corpus Christi is in can easily be faced by a number of other large cities in Texas. And so there's some lessons to be learned here, for the rest of the state, and I think, again, the country, and the world. So to explain what's going on with Corpus Christi, I kind of want to first talk about the water planning process. And so this is it in a nutshell. How much water we have now, that's at current supplies. How much we're going to need, which involves projecting population and industry and things like that. Comparing those two, do we have enough? If we don't, what do we need to do to get more water? And then how much it will cost. This is how we do water planning. It's pretty much the basics of water planning, regardless of where you do it. After the 1950s drought, in which Dallas nearly ran out of water, Dallas was really struggling, banned all outdoor watering, drilling emergency groundwater wells. Echoes very similar to Corpus. Finally, it rained, and the state was like, man, that stunk. What can we do? They created the Texas Water Development Board, created water planning. And so these are the plans. They used to be top down, so technocrats kind of looked at a plan for the state. But then since 2002, they've been this bottom up with regional water plans. And it's been in my opinion, it's been a really, really good process. The current plan is 2022. There is a draft plan on the streets at the Water Development Board's webpage. This will move from draft to final at the very end of this year, maybe in January of next year. So we've been doing a bunch of planning. And one key thing about water planning in Texas is that it's based on the recurrence of the worst recorded drought, known as drought of record. So when we plan for the future, we have to plan for climatic or weather conditions in the future, and we make sure we have enough water for a repeat of the drought of record. Statewide, that drought is the 1950s drought, but it changes depending on what part of the state you are. And in fact, each reservoir may have a completely different drought of record. These change over time. For Austin, the drought of record was the 1950s drought until the 2008 to 2015 drought, where that became a new drought of record. We just came out of another really bad drought that very well could be a new drought of record. You don't know if something's a drought of record or not until the drought is over, and somebody runs these water availability models to take a look. And so this is, some would say this is a very conservative way of planning. If you just kind of take the time period divided by 1, which is the worst drought, you have a recurrence interval of about 130 years. So you could say, this is the worst drought that occurs once every 130 years. So that sounds conservative. And it's a real drought. So, this isn't a hypothetical drought. This is a real drought that we're managing for. However, what does the drought of record mean? Well, it means that the rivers and reservoirs go dry at the end of the drought. So when we plan for a drought of record, it means here's how much water we can get from our reservoir on an annual basis through the drought of record. But at the end of the drought of record, guess how much water is in that reservoir? 0. And so that's right off the bat, that's problematic in my opinion. This is a real drought. So we've seen this drought before, but we've optimized our water supply to having just enough water to get through the drought of record, which means the river or the lake goes dry at the end of the drought of record. And that's a problem, in my opinion. And I would say, looking at Corpus, there's the proof in the pudding. Firm yield is the annual amount of water you can use to get through the drought of record. So another kitty. So, different kitty. So this is this is how the state permits surface water for municipal supplies and for power plants, because the state of Texas wants reliability in the water supplies. But there is something called safe yield. And so the safe yield is the annual amount of water you can use through the drought of record plus a safety factor of a certain number of years. And so I mentioned Wichita Falls. Wichita Falls, before their drought of record, where they nearly ran out of water, which is the 2011-2015 drought, they managed their resource under drought of record conditions. They were 3 months from running out of water. They were doing crazy things to make sure they didn't run out of water. And so the outcome is now they plan for, instead of a firm yield based on drought of record, they do a safe yield, which is drought of record, in their case, plus 2 years, which is unusually high. Usually we'll see folks do 1 year. And Corpus actually does a safe yield. And it's about, I'm not sure exactly how they calculate it, but it looks like it's about like 5 months of extra time. So plus 5 months. I'll note this about Corpus, that their safe yield is to leave 75,000 acre feet of storage in the reservoirs, the Western Supplies, Choke Canyon, and Corpus Christi, at the end of the drought of record. And we crossed that threshold 2-3 weeks ago. So that's a strong indication that we're probably in a new drought of record for Corpus Christi. So can we have a drought worse than the drought of record? Oh, hell yeah. We've seen it. It's happened multiple times. And I believe we're seeing it, I'm 99% sure we're seeing it in Corpus Christi today, just given where their reservoirs are today. If you're suspicious of that, then we can look at past a deeper record of past data. So this is Pinocchio. Well, without a valid ID, you'll have to lie down on the bar so I can determine your age. The bartender's got a saw, just in case somebody's on their phone, since Rose is. But we can use tree ring data to extend the climatic data deeper into the past. And so this is tree ring data that goes back to 1300, the year 1300. And you'll see in red, I've colored in where the really severe droughts were. On the right here, you can see the 1950s drought. So it shows up in this data set. Here's the Dust Bowl. And then you can kind of look back and see when there's been some nasty, nasty droughts. The 50s drought, competes pretty well with droughts since about, 1600, since Columbus stopped by. But then just before Columbus got here, well, actually, no, Columbus was what, 1497. So never mind. Columbus plus 100 years. But we had some, we call them mega droughts, super multi-decadal. And look at this 15th century one, which is like 50, 60 years. This one's almost 70 years. And then there's tree ring data that goes back to like the year 900, which shows like a 100-year drought around the year 1000. So tree ring suggests we can have a drought worse than the drought of record. So it's certainly possible there. And then if you believe the models looking forward, we can certainly have droughts worse than droughts of record looking at global warming. And so this is average annual temperatures over Texas. And here's the mean for 1901 through 1975. And then we see this trend since 1975. So you don't have to be a geologist to see that there is an upward trend in temperatures here. And in fact, and this is kind of alarming to me, our expected temperature now in any year going forward is higher than we were in the drought of the 50s and the Dust Bowl. So we are a lot warmer, and that has consequences for our water supplies. This is the average temperature trend across Texas. So the temperature, of course, is going up. And then here's the overall precipitation trend. This is interesting. Statewide, we're actually seeing more rainfall. But, the high plains, kind of the Trans-Pecos area, and then interestingly enough, the Edwards Plateau tends to see lower um, rainfall. And so the headwaters of the Nueces River Basin are up in this area, certainly affected by that. And then when we look at projected changes in soil moisture, so there's temperature, there's rain, and then those work together in terms of soil moisture. When it's warmer, you get more evaporation off the soil, the plants are using more water, and so you get decreased soil moisture. Decreased soil moisture means less runoff into streams, rivers, and reservoirs. It also means less recharge to the aquifer. And so this is a modest projection. This is kind of the path we're on now, is what all these fancy words here in terms of where we're going with adding greenhouse gases. And it doesn't look good. I mean, there's places where we see some pretty good increases in rainfall, but Texas and most of the world's expected to see, I'm sorry, not rainfall, but soil moisture, expected to see less soil moisture. And then this is state climatologist John Nielsen Gammon projecting out soil moisture this is a more severe climate projection. A lot of scientists, myself included, don't think this is really going to happen. But even if you took half of this decline, look at the red line, which is a measure of soil. It's a measure of drought, and it has a big emphasis on soil moisture. Even if you took half of that, this is pretty ugly. This right here is the drought of the 50s, and we look to be in the mid part of the century, towards the end, kind of permanent soil moisture conditions or drought conditions like the drought of the 50s. So this is disturbing. I'm working with a graduate student now, actually a couple graduate students, where it looks like we might be seeing some of this already happening in the Oasis River Basin. So this is a stream gauge on the West Nueces River near Brackettville. It's up above the Edwards Aquifer Recharge Zone. And if the stream flow, and this is adding each day to the previous day's total, and then just keeping adding, so it's like summing everything up over time. And if things stay the same, like nothing changes, it should follow this red line. It should be a straight line. But in fact, it's bending over. Um, and up in this part of the state, there's not a big city up there, there's not a reservoir, there's not a lot of new people, there's not a lot of land use change, but there has been a heck of an increase in temperature up there. There's not been a lot of groundwater pumping. So this suggests that through process of elimination, this is probably a temperature affected bending over. And so we've seen since 1980, 300,000 acre feet of water that should have been coming down the river that's not, and that the system's 33% less productive than it was before. This is a stream gauge, and this is actual data, daily data over time, just upstream of Choke Canyon Reservoir. And things were up here, and then now they're way down here. So it was almost like a tipping point in the system. And again, there's not a whole lot going on in this basin, so it's kind of hard to know exactly what's going on. This is from the regional water plan for the new regional water plan that'll go in the 2027 state water plan. And it's showing that like the drought of the 50s was a drought of record. Then we had a nasty drought in the mid 60s, and it looks like that was a new drought of record. Drought of the 90s kind of just squeezed past that one, and then the drought in the early 2010s was a new drought of record, and then we're in another new drought of record now. I'll be shocked if the technical analysis doesn't come back with a new drought of record. So there's a trend, like this is what would be projected from climate change. We would continue to see more and more droughts of record. And then here's the 75,000 acre foot of reserve. So this is what they're actually planning for and have been planning for in Corpus Christi. So this is a terrible pun, but right, there's a stationary bike, but this is the stationarity bike. And stationarity is so like the way we plan in Texas, we're always looking backwards. Like Catherine Hayhoe goes, it's like driving a car forward by looking in the rearview mirror. We're always looking back at the statistics. But in reality, what we're dealing with is, there's changes in the future. We're getting warmer. That's having impacts. And so what we think is a drought of record that maybe has a recurrence interval of every 130 years is actually the recurrence interval is much smaller than that. And when you look backwards and base things on the past, you're assuming a stationarity of the statistics. In other words, there's not a trend, but we clearly see an upward trend. So that's an issue with how we do planning. Who else is at risk in Texas? First I want to say who's maybe doing a good job. El Paso, out of necessity, 8 inches of rainfall. They started off 100% groundwater. They're mining their groundwater, and so they decided they needed to um, um, use surface water to preserve their groundwater. And so they're in a situation now where they can go 100% surface water or 100% groundwater. And so if the surface water dries up, and for them, it's Elephant Butte, New Mexico, or the run of the river, they can go 100% groundwater. But if the surface water there, they can use it. It's a similar story for the Canadian River Municipal Water Authority. They operate Lake Meredith. They were 100% surface water. During I guess since about maybe about 2000, they're dealing with lower lake levels, increased salinity, and so they invested in groundwater to decrease the salinity of their water. But then the lakes kept going down, and so they kept expanding their groundwater supplies. They're the ones who bought Boone Pickens water, by the way, if that name's familiar to you. And they can also now go 100% groundwater or 100% surface water, is how they do things. Um, but in terms of who else is at risk, the Lower Rio Grande Valley is at risk, because Lower Rio Grande Valley doesn't have a replacement supply for its vulnerable surface water supplies. And that's the situation Corpus is in. And it's not typical to be able to go 100% one way or the other, because that means completely duplicating your water resources. Austin is at risk. Dallas Fort Worth is at risk. Both of these areas are pretty much 100% dependent on surface water. Um, Waco, kind of central Texas, Killeen area, almost 100%. They get some groundwater there, but almost 100% surface water. Even Houston, Houston struggled unexpectedly in the 2011 to 2015 drought. So, folks in these places can kind of look down their nose at Corpus and go, tis, tis, tis. But actually, a twist of the weather, they could easily find themselves in a similar situation. And I think, as you go from the drier to the wetter, it's a higher risk in the drier parts of the state, lower going this way. Um, so this 100% one way or the other, I've referred to as pure conjunctive use, but I thought I need a more academic name for it. Body snatcher conjunctive use didn't really work, but interchangeable conjunctive use. And conjunctive use means like using multiple sources of water together. Um, but with this uncertainty in climate and the ability for our reservoirs to go dry, what we really need to do is have backup supplies, and that's expensive, and that's a difficult decision for policymakers to make, like city council, as well as ratepayers to take as well. So what can cities do? They should plan on using, I just have a couple more slides if Rose is getting nervous. Plan on using safe yield, not firm yields. And I would recommend 2 years. I'm toying with these because I'm probably going to write this up and share this with friends at the legislature. I think at this point it should be considered insane to just plan on drought of record. Like with the state planning process, if you have enough water to meet your needs under drought of record conditions, you get a gold star. You have done your job. But we're seeing where that gets you with the Corpus Christi experience. There's still risk there. I think there's a false sense of security planning for the drought of record. We really need to be planning for a drought worse than the drought of record. I think cities need to assess the risk to the loss of the surface water supplies, and that's not really being done. I serve on a water planning committee for the city of Austin, and I noted, yeah, and Austin plans for a 100-year water plan with climate change, but they still are relying on the reservoirs not going dry. And I asked them, hey, are you going to have a plan for when if the reservoirs go dry? And they're like, that'll never happen. Touche. I think it very well could happen. But maybe Houston doesn't have to worry so much about it. Maybe Lufkin doesn't have to worry so much about it. But if you're in the Valley or if you're Austin, you probably really ought to worry about it. Dallas, Fort Worth, who's been brought to its knees by a serious drought, they plan for the drought of record. And if they saw a new drought of record or saw a drought of record like Corpus has seen, they would be in a very similar situation as Corpus. I also recommend that cities develop a plan B for if or when their surface water supplies are lost. So in other words, I'm not saying go out and build a seawater desal like Austin. If Austin um, needed to replace its surface water supplies, 100% surface water, where are they going to go? I mean, it's like they could, import groundwater, big pipelines, it could be seawater desal as well. Is Austin going to do that? Probably not. I think that's a hard sell, but there should be a plan where Austin knows when they have to implement what by when in order to get the water. Um, this could have helped Corpus. Um, I think Corpus knew that, or suspected that they were going to need a backup supply, but it's really hard to convince politicians and voters to pay for something that you might not ever need. Um, New York Times interviewed me, and he says, "You said something really funny." I said, "What was that?" And he said, "You said the best way to guarantee it's going to rain is to start building a seawater desal plant." That happened in Australia because it takes 2, 3 years to build that plant, and so it's plenty of time to allow to rain. But if you don't do it and you run out of water, that's a really bad day. And then implement Plan B, or all of it, depending on the risk and the risk tolerance and the ease. But there's like things that a city could be getting ready before they have to do this to be set up to like decrease the response time. And I'm going to skip over this since I'm running late, just a bunch of tables. But I want to conclude with this slide, which is a slide I've used many times before, which ultimately, like considering climate change or uncertainty, is like plan for the worst. Maybe we need to plan for a worst than we've been planning for. Hope for the best, but expect to be surprised. And with that, happy to take any questions. I am willing to hang out a little longer to take questions if we go past 8 o'clock. But thank you so much for your attention, this opportunity to talk about Corpus Christi and then in specific, but really the water risks we have across the state in general.
Thanks, Bob. That was super informative, a little scary, but I think we all expected that. But really nice overview of some of the critical issues. Um, let's open it up for questions. Anybody?
I have a question.
Sure.
Um, what what is the impact or the total, the effect of tropical storms and hurricanes on replenishing the reservoirs? I mean, what do we pray for hurricanes now?
Whether you knew it or not, we probably have always been praying for hurricanes. It has a big impact. Almost all of our serious droughts are ended with serious floods, it seems. And a lot of those are sourced from hurricanes. So even like we had those massive floods in July of last year. There was you could tie that back to tropical weather that pulled Austin completely out of drought. Like we were, it was starting to look scarier and scarier for Austin until that storm hit. That is a kind of a nice quick way to get things back. Kind of my concern is that with the increased temperatures, the systems don't respond the same way. And so I'm not sure normal rainfall, like I'm not even sure like 5 years of normal rainfall refills the reservoirs. With the Highland Lakes, we continue to see record low inflows, over time. And even with, say, the same rainfall, if we got the same rainfall pattern today that we got 10 or 20 years ago, there's a lot less water coming off the landscape now. So we're probably, answer your question, I think we're probably praying for tropical systems more. I prefer to say mellow tropical systems. Nobody gets hurt, nobody's property's damaged, but we just get, a lot of rain that refills our reservoirs and our aquifers.
Chris, you have a question?
Hey, Robert. Great presentation. I always learn so much from all your stuff. So the Corpus situation, there's a history of all the desal stuff and the city councils and stopping it because it went over budget and this and that. Like, would a desal, even if it was on track, what would have been the potential percentage of the water portfolio that a desal plant would have potentially provided, according to the estimates?
Um, Yeah, so obviously there's been a lot of angst. There's concerns about the environmental impacts. There's been several desal plants proposed down there. Nueces River Authority is pitching a big desal plant. Water Development Board just turned down funding for it, so there's like speculation. Was there politics involved there? What's going on there? I think I kind of wrap everything up what Corpus is going through, rightly or wrongly, into the angst of paying for a water supply that maybe you only need, once every 25 years or once every 50 years, or if you look backwards, once every 130 years. Do I think it's smart to have a backup supply? Yes. I think Corpus has clearly seen enough to do that, but that's really expensive. Now it's too late for seawater desal to solve their problems, and so they're pursuing groundwater. And Nueces County doesn't have a groundwater district, so Corpus can drill those wells pretty easily, but they do have a well field in a county, I'm forgetting the name of it, that does have a groundwater district, and there's been a protest on that permit that could throw a wrench in the works of them meeting their supplies. But it's like if all these well fields are drilled and Corpus uses that water, and then we get Marsh's mellow tropical system to come through and fill the reservoirs. What'll probably happen there is that Corpus will use the surface water when it's available and have this backup of groundwater, for when they need it, when the reservoirs go dry. So I wouldn't anticipate Corpus would be pumping those well fields all the time, although you'd have to pump it at some minimal level to keep the equipment good and the wells good and all that jazz. But but in terms of like how much it could supply, it could supply all of it. There's still in the water plan, there are still, thanks SB. Um, Let me go ahead and I got somebody asking for contact information, so I'm just going to reshare my last slide. So it could be a lot. If you look in the water plan, there's 3 seawater desal plants, brackish groundwater desal, well fields, and reuse and water conservation, to meet those future needs. I should also note that the new water plan that's coming out, it's clear Corpus has gotten the message from Mother Nature that it needs to have a 100% backup supply. And so the water plan has 100% backup supply from surface water for its use as well as industrial use.
We have another question. I can't see your name. I see JPIC. Do you have a question? Incarnate? You're on mute.
Yes, I
There
do
we
have
go.
a question. Considering that there's a lot of industries here in Corpus Christi, um, apart from, like the residents, trying to conserve water, um, what is how can the industry, help out, knowing that I know that they are protected, but still they're using more than or 60% of the water supply. What can, what can they do, like as much as the residents are also conserving water. And also, uh, does Texas actually recycle water?
So I'll tackle your last question first. So yes, we do quite a bit of water recycling, and there's a lot of more capacity for more. Leaders on the water recycling side, San Antonio is a big leader. The Riverwalk, that water is treated wastewater these days. The Toyota plant in San Antonio uses treated wastewater. Austin has a big program. A lot of cities these days have wastewater reuse as part of their water portfolio. El Paso is building a big, we call a direct potable reuse plant. So they're going to take their wastewater and completely clean it up and put it back into their potable drinking water supply system. Texas has the second plant in the world that does that operates out of Big Spring, Texas. So there's, and I refer to like wastewater treatment plants as like local springs. That's generally water you have and you own, and it could be put to better use. So to answer your question, yes on there. In terms of what industry could do more in conserving water, it just boils down to like like who can cut back and who can't. And again, it's like it isn't so much that industry, I would say, and I can't really speak for industry, but like they just can't. It's like if your plant runs at only at 100 miles an hour and you can't dial it back to 75, then you're stuck. Like I don't know if those plants can be designed in such a way that you can control and toggle back and forth on how much water you have. Um, but I don't think anybody anticipated, and I think this is true. I don't think anybody anticipated that things could get this bad. But if you stop and think about it, things could get this bad. Because if we had a repeat of the drought of record, which is a drought we've seen, we would be experiencing what we're experiencing now. So it's a good question. It's going to depend on the industry, depend on the plant, and I'm not an expert in that, but what I understand, talking to my industry contacts is that, they just can't. And if things, I feel like this 25% reduction question, I'm speculating here, but it's like at some point, if that comes to realization, there may have to be a discussion amongst industry over like who shuts down to overall meet that 25% reduction for industry. Because somebody or a group of somebodies are going to have to shut down to meet that target. Um, Whereas, with homeowners, it's, I mean, although I have rainwater harvesting, my wife and I have 5,000 gallons of rainwater harvesting that's designed to be drought proof at our house to meet our outdoor needs, but it can be devastating to folks to like not be able to, see their trees die and their landscaping die. And there are quality of life things there, but like if the city says you got to cut back 25%, you're not making a decision over um, completely moving out of town or not. Although maybe you are. I mean, when you've banned all outdoor watering to citizens, where's the other 25% going to come from? Now, Cape Town, got people to reduce their use quite a bit. And I'm forgetting the exact amount, but a shocking amount compared to what we're used to using as Americans or Texans. And we could get there, shorter showers, looking for leaks and all that jazz. Rose.
Thanks. At listening to you speak, one of the things, it's a two-part question, but the first part is one of the things I know North Texas better. One of the things that we do is to mitigate heat is we are working on tree canopy, right? And it's sort of a sort of siloed approach, if you will, because of course trees require care and they require water. And so when you start looking at it from a more systemic, a holistic perspective, which is, droughts and heats and water and tree canopy, and I'm just not sure, I'd be interested in your thoughts on that. Is that sort of holistic view being shared with municipal governments? Because I'm not seeing it in the space I'm working.
Yeah, that's a great, great question. Probably not. In part it's because cities don't think about this, like what happens. They're not thinking about what happens when the unthinkable happens. And a lot of cities, when I talk to them, it's like the lakes will never go dry. We won't experience that. That's highly unlikely. And it's unlikely, although we really don't know how likely it is with climate change, and it's apparently more likely with climate change. You look at that data for Corpus, and it's like, almost every 20 years are experiencing a new drought record. Um, but they don't tend to think about that. And I feel like this whole planning for the drought record, it creates a false sense of security that doesn't get considered. But you're right, a lot is lost. Like if you ban all outdoor watering, then you lose the tree canopy, and you just don't get that back fast. When if all the trees die because of that lack of water. A little more about Cape Town. Like they this kind of goes back to health and human safety, but like they had a real problem with getting people to comply with the water restrictions to decrease water loss, not only by customers, but also from leaks. And they had actually pretty good leakage, like maybe 15% of their water was leaking, which that's a decent number. They would do, you've heard about rolling blackouts, right? From, from ERCOT. They were doing rolling dry outs, basically shutting off the water, or decreasing the overall water pressure, which that could be an issue in the United States, because the state and EPA has certain pressure requirements. But then what happens when meeting those pressure requirements means you don't have water to provide to anybody? And so they you know lowered the water pressure across the city to try to minimize use. They encourage people to collect rainwater, AC condensate to flush toilets to decrease water use. With folks who are not complying, they put meters at the street that once you got your daily allocation, you were shut off from the water supply. And there was some gunplay, which would probably happen in Texas.
Only imagine.
Yes. And some people might be like, that's South Africa, that's Cape Town, but the issues I've studied kind of what they went through, and I'm just like, yep, I could easily see this happening in a
Well, we saw it
Western
in
city.
Houston when after the hurricane with the journeymen who were trying to restore electricity. They were threatened and bullied, and there were gun incidents. So yeah, it's
Yeah,
right here.
yeah. So I don't know. What Corpus is going through is also an opportunity to, like, I think water planning and what Corpus is going through is going to be a big topic the next legislative session. So I think, and this is part of why I'm like, okay, here's some recommendations kind of based on my experience, and in terms of like, this is really what folks need to be thinking about, and getting ready to do and deal with, and perhaps the unthinkable needs to be thought about, which is, hey, what happens when the lakes go dry? Because it's not out of the question. We've seen that drought. Um, I did try to, back during the 2011-2015 drought, I tried to have a study done to kind of put together a white paper on like, what does a community need to think about when your water supply is running out? And that might relate to your question, Rose, where it's like, what, and also it's an incentive, like maybe that horror story, convinces people to ensure they have enough water. They have a safety factor built in. One of my engineering friends is like, yeah, engineers should be easily sold on having a safety factor, rather than just having enough water. Here's a crazy thing is that in the water plan, Corpus Christi has enough water for a repeat of the drought record, not only for this decade, but through 2070. So they don't have to build a single new project to have enough water under the drought record.
That's the key.
Yeah, that's the key. Exactly. That's the key qualifier, is that we can have a drought worse than the drought record. So if anything comes out of Corpus, I think maybe that's a sobering thing, because I don't think anybody would want to go through this again. And hopefully Corpus has learned from this. But if we get Marsh's mellow tropical system and it rains, I mean, Corpus is looking to spend hundreds of millions of dollars on well fields. And if the reservoirs are full this time next week, you think they're really still going to do that? Maybe not. Probably not. And then 10 years from now, we'll be doing the same thing again. So it's called the hydrological cycle. It rains and everybody, problem solved. We avoided the worst.
Well, this was really amazingly interesting and again, very sobering in a lot of ways, but I really appreciate your time and your expertise. Look forward to that white paper. I think that would be amazing. And, what I would ask is that if you think of a way in which Texas PSR, we do advocacy and we're always looking at, how can we collaborate? So I would, keep us in the loop and let us know how we might be able to support what I think we're all going to be addressing very soon, if not now.
Yeah, well, wonderful. And as you know, you need water for health and human safety. So
Good. All right. Good night, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Appreciate it and take care.
thank you for the
Good
questions.
night.
And don't hesitate to reach out if you have any other questions. Good to see you, Chris.
Good night. Thank you, everybody.